Okay, everybody, welcome back to whatever my channel is named these days. What I'm doing is trying to replace the voltage regulator on my E39 BMW with the M54b30 engine. So this is the 530i, it's a 2002 model year. So my alternator looks new and shiny, and I got it from a place that came with good recommendations, but my voltage was going up and down all over the place, giving me some electrical gremlins, and before something got fried, I took the car off the road and contacted the vendor. They sent me a new voltage regulator and said, oh, it'll be easy to replace instead of the whole alternator. I said, great. So I took a look at it. Now, obviously, there's a big thing missing here, and that is my air box. So that comes out with one 10mm bolt right there, and then you take the clips off right here and here on the MAF, and then you, of course, unhook the MAF, because that's going to come out next. But that box lifts out, and then back here, there is a couple, I'm just going to do the first one, band clamps. I'm going to take this whole part out here. I already took this breather tube out. And I looked at my old alternator to see if this was reasonable to do without taking the alternator out. And so it does. I don't have a great light here. Let me see if I can't use this light. Yeah, it's kind of dim. But back here, there is some space behind the alternator. And it looks like it's 2 bolts and maybe a couple Phillips heads. So I'm going to go into greater detail, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like as it's coming apart. So oftentimes, and the reason that I want to show this is because oftentimes if your alternator stops working, but it's not making a grinding or a whirring noise, and the belt assembly seems to be spinning fine elsewise, the alternator itself hasn't failed from a mechanical perspective. It might simply be the voltage regulator. A buddy of mine who works on older BMWs and newer ones, but has been doing this for a while, says on the older ones there was a common fix for alternators, which was just swapping out the voltage regulator, which he says was easier than this. So anyway, I'm giving it a shot, but this is something that I did not find on YouTube, so I figured I'd make my own. Here is my old alternator. I ordered online, and I did not have to send this back for a core, which turns out to be convenient since this is a good model to use and practice on, so I'm not working completely blind in the engine bay. So there are 2 12mm nuts that come off, and then a Phillips head screw. There's one here and one there, and then there's the Phillips head right there. This is your battery plus terminal. That just holds the cap on, and so does that. So this lifts right off, and here we are. Now, once you're inside, and this was full of leaves and whatnot prior, so maybe that's why it failed. This is the new voltage regulator, and this is the old one. So it looks like there are a total of 3 Phillips head screws to remove. One there, and one there. So there's not a whole lot of clearance in the engine bay, but if you set up a 1/4 inch or a 3/8 inch ratchet with a maybe a small extension and a 1/4 inch socket, you can put a bit on the front of it and get to those, and that's what I'm hoping to do. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so I'm beginning to be more and more confident. What I had to do was take these 2 12mm bolts off the power steering reservoir so I can move it so this hose gives me access. Now, when I came back here, I realized this alternator had different bolt sizes than my original. There's a 15mm, and then I think it was a 18 for the main battery positive nut. So I've still got to take the one Phillips head out of this, but then it should slide out. There is room behind this for it to slide out, so things are looking positive here. Great success so far. Update on the battery positive nut. Yes, this is an 18mm, but behind it is a 15mm nut that holds the cap on. So just clarifying that. Now on the bottom, that Phillips head screw, I just used a bit driver extension like this with a 1/4 inch wrench like this to drive it on the end. And once it got loose, I could just spin it by hand. And so that's how I got to that. There is a coolant line here, and I plugged that up with a bottle of touch-up paint because I needed a bit more clearance with that hose, and I didn't want to break the plastic hose right there. So I lost a bit of coolant, but nothing that I can't fix. So just a tip on that, do not flex that line. You're better off pulling it off, losing a bit of coolant, and plugging it up with something to get more clearance. But I might not have needed to do that. I just discovered this little trick after I did that. I was trying to get a full-size screwdriver there, and it just wasn't happening. So why would someone choose to replace the voltage regulator in situ instead of taking the alternator out of the vehicle. Well, it is possible. I just did it. Here's the new one in, and I'm going to put it all back together. Yeah, you've got to move the power steering reservoir. Yeah, you've got to unplug a coolant hose, maybe. But besides that, it's just your air intake and the back cap of the alternator. However, to replace an alternator requires removing the fan shroud, removing the fan clutch and the fan assembly, removing this tube right here, and then taking the belt assembly off. And, you know, it's a bunch of work. This is significantly quicker. You know, this whole job elsewise with all the right tools, having done it before, because I have, took me about an hour and a half to do the alternator. I'm not the fastest tech, but I get it done. This right here, if I had a YouTube video that would have given me the right tools, like I hope this one does, might take you less than an hour. So it saves time. There's less stuff that you have to mess with. You know, the fan shroud can be fragile. This one's newer, but older ones are quite brittle and they might break coming out. So you deal with more coolant stuff when you have to remove your alternator. So you might find that this is a better solution to a charging issue than replacing the entire alternator. So, you know, just something to think about. And certainly, this will come in handy from time to time if your alternator isn't really bad, it's just your voltage regulator. So I'm gonna put this all back together and watch my voltage when I start it up, and hopefully it's quite steady. Well, Stella Blue is buttoned all back up, and I'm about to start her up and watch the volts. So before you go and you replace your voltage regulator, I'm assuming you've already watched your volts on some sort of app on your phone or some sort of diagnostic device. An O'Reilly's, a Napa AutoZone charging battery system scan might show you this. It might not, because I was getting 16 volts once in a bit, not all the time. And if they're going to start it up and run it for 15-20 seconds, which is what they do, they might not see it. So it's a good idea to pay the 15-20 bucks for the Bluetooth sender and download the free Torque app and watch your volts. Now, if you do see them jumping around, think about when they're jumping. Is it on a throttle input? If it's on a throttle input, you might think that your belt is slipping or your tensioner's failing. In my situation, I had replaced those a year and a half, 2 years ago, and they had 20, 30,000 miles at most. And I had just replaced the alternator, and I had put my hands on that entire assembly, and everything was fine. So I knew that the tensioner and the belt were in good shape. And I was watching the volts jump around on cruise control on a flat highway where the engine wouldn't be doing anything but providing the belt assembly with a steady source stream of power, of torque. So there shouldn't be any slipping of the belt anyway in that situation. So think about when it's jumping around, and that might help you figure out what's going on. Good luck.